Appalachia. Everybody in the world has a reaction to that word. Makes folks think everything from beautiful mountaintop views, dangerous hillbillies running through the woods with a rifle in one hand and a jug of shine in the other, trailer parks, drugs, and blame near everything in between. The Appalachian Mountains are the oldest mountains in the world. They once towered 30,000 feet into the air. They stretch along the eastern U.S., Canada, through 14 states all the way to Louisiana. Folks that live in these mountains have seen and endured enough things to have happened to them to make a preacher cut. Hello, I'm Larry Benton. I was born and raised in the Appalachian Mountains of southwest Virginia, and I was raised there by folks who lived for generations right there in the heart of them old mountains. Come with me and we'll take a look at some of the odd, awful, or legendary things that happen within my beloved mountains, and we'll be traveling around a bit, looking through the eyes of an old Appalachian at some of the crazy that done spread itself around outside the area as well. Welcome to Season 6 of Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend. Howdy, my good friends. I hope you're doing well today. Thank you for stopping by and joining me today. Now, we all know that the mist rolls in heavy over that New River Gorge, but some secrets are too dark for even that deep mountain fog to hide. Today we're headed to southern West Virginia, a place where the cold seams run deep and the church pews are usually full on Sunday morning. Now we're going back to the winter of 1983 to a little stretch of earth called Dry Hill, just north of Beckley. Now this is a story that challenges everything we know about good boys and quiet homes. Many of you folks who are around my age will recognize it right off because you're like me. You remember it when it happened, and the shock wave it threw across the state of West Virginia. It's a story of the Ball family and the Friday evening that changed Beckley forever. So come on in, take your shoes off, and set a spell while I run this one across the ringers for you. Now, Beckley back in 1983, because a whole lot of younger folks today might not realize just how different southern West Virginia was back then. Well, coal paid a whole lot more bills then, even if the industry was starting to wobble a little bit on its knees. But more men headed underground before daylight came, and they came home looking like they'd been wrestling a chimney sweep inside a chimney. I guess more of them than you could shake a stick at did that. Women stretched groceries like they all know that, sold soup beans and stuff like that, cornbread, that type of stretching. They raised children on hand-me-downs and sewn patches, and somehow managed to keep families running on budgets tighter than the skin on your teeth. Now, folks knew their neighbors. They knew their neighbors' parents. And heck, most of them knew their neighbors' grandparents, too. If you got caught acting a fool on Main Street, there's a good chance your mama would hear about it before you even made it back home. Like we who live in the mountains know to be true, mama knows. Back then, people still left doors unlocked. Not everybody, mind you, but enough that it wasn't unusual. Biggest excitement, many a time, might be a loose dog, a kid biting or taking his BB gun to a street light, or somebody's teenage son getting caught sneaking beer out behind the football field. That sounds a whole lot like where I come from. A crime like the one we're talking about today belongs somewhere else, somewhere far away, somewhere on the evening news that wasn't Dry Hill. The Ball family looked like a sort of family people pointed to when they talked about good mountain value. Harold worked hard, Betty worked hard, and the boys were raised in church. They weren't known for causing trouble. All appearances, they were doing exactly what thousands of Appalachian families have been doing for generations, just trying to build a decent life one paycheck at a time. Like most parents, Harold and Betty probably weren't dreaming about raising movie stars or millionaires. They likely just wanted the same things mountain parents have wanted since the first cabin was built there in them hills to start with. Finish school, stay out of jail, and get a job. Then find you somebody that'll tolerate you for the next 50 years and maybe provide a few grandbabies before everybody gets too old to chase them around the yard. Now, it ain't glamorous, but around the Appalachian Mountains, that's considered pretty successful living, which is what makes what happened next so hard to understand or even believe. Now, January in the Appalachian Mountains ain't just a month, it's a test. The wind comes off them ridges sharp as a whetted knife, and by late afternoon, the light starts to fail, turning the hills into silhouettes of jagged charcoal. On Friday, January 28, 1983, the air was right brittle. In a small, unassuming house on Dry Hill, well, Harold and Betty Ball were finishing up the week. Harold was 38, Betty was 36, and like we said, they're the kind of folks that formed the backbone of the mountain. Steady, hard-working, and devoted to their three sons, which was 16-year-old Jerry, 11-year-old Stephen, and 6-year-old Richard. To the outside world, the Balls were a picture of Appalachian stability. They were active in their church, the boys were polite. Jerry, the oldest, was a regular at youth fellowship. His aunt, Margaret Lucas, well, described him as a good boy, the kind who didn't go looking for any trouble ever. But inside the four walls of that house, a storm was a brewing that no amount of prayer, reason, or mountain stubbornness was going to stop. Now, we all know that you never truly know what's happening behind a neighbor's curtain. Jerry was 16, that age where the world starts to feel a little more unexplored than you'd like it to be, and the rules of your parents start getting in the way of you being the one to correct that situation. Now, if you're ever been 16 years old, and unless you're listening from another planet, you probably have, you already know that the age comes with a special kind of stupidity. At 16, you've got all the confidence of a Supreme Court justice and about half the decision-making skills of a possum trying to cross Interstate 64. You know everything. At least you think you do. Your parents suddenly become the dumbest people walking the face of the earth. They don't understand your friends, they don't understand your plans, and they sure don't understand how unfair life is. Then somewhere around age 21, you wake up one morning and discover that them aggravating old people were right about nearly everything you talked about. Jerry Ball was living in that dangerous stretch of life where emotions run hotter than reason. Friends described him as ruthless. Some said he felt smothered by rules. Others said he had grown increasingly mad at home. But here's the thing. Thousands of teenagers get grounded. Thousands keep on skipping school. And thousands run around screaming that they hate their parents. Most of them grow up, get jobs, raise families, and spend the rest of their lives apologizing for how big of a dumbass they was at 16. That's why Jerry's threat didn't set off any alarms. Now, when he told his friends that he would kill his parents if they just kept hassling, it sounded like the kind of thing that a pissed off teenager say. Now, people rolled their eyes. I guess they figured he'd cool off, sleep on it, and would get up embarrassed. Now, fortunately, the next morning brought no apology, no cooling off, and blame sure no second thoughts. Instead, something happened inside that little house on Dry Hill that would leave investigators asking questions for decades. Now, the day before, which was Thursday, the tension snapped. Jerry was caught skipping school. Now, for a boy in a good family, that wasn't just a mistake, it was a scandal. That night, the house on Dry Hill was probably filled with the sounds of family argument and the kind of words getting said that most of the time can't get took back. Jerry went to see a friend that night amidst his teenage know-it-all attitude in the shadows of the night, and he told everybody that his parents kept hassling him. He was going to leave them with the holes in their bodies where their lives had been. And in 1983 in West Virginia, you didn't call the police over teenagers' temper tantrums. You just figured he was blowing off steam and would cool off. Now, the sun had long since dipped below the horizon when the first police cruisers wound their way up toward Dry Hill around 7 o'clock that evening on January 28th. Now, they'd been called in to do a welfare check on the residents, but nothing could have prepared them for what they laid across that threshold. Trooper W.H. Berry was one of the first to step inside. The air in the house was heavy smelling of spent gunpowder and something metallic. Now, for folks that work at EMS, that would be the unmistakable copper scent of fresh blood. Once you smell it, you just don't forget it. In the living areas of the house, they found pretty much complete devastation. Harold and Betty Ball had been shot and beat. The violence hadn't stopped with the adults either. The two younger boys, Stephen and Richard, had been caught in a cyclone from hell with the rest of them. The little Richard was 6 years old, hadn't stood a chance. He died instantly. But when the troopers reached 11-year-old Stephen, they found a spark of life left in him. He was clinging to the world by a shoestring. He was rushed to the hospital. Sirens were screaming through Beckley streets, but it ended up the damage was just too much. Hours later, in the quiet of the hospital room, the third son of Harold and Betty Ball just slipped away. While the medics were fighting for Stephen's life, the police were hunting for the family car. They didn't have to look long. They found 16-year-old Jerry Ball driving the vehicle not far from the scene of the slaughter. When they pulled him over, officers expected a boy in hysterics, so they expected tears or maybe a panic fight, but instead they found a void. Trooper Barry said that Jerry showed no emotion. He wasn't crying, he wasn't screaming, he was just there. It was like the boy who'd sat in a youth fellowship just days before had been replaced by something hollow and empty. Investigators started piecing together the how. It wasn't just a gun. Jerry had used a Louisville Slugger too, with a .22 caliber handgun. It was a close quarters, intimate kind of violence, and it wasn't a drive-by or a robbery gone wrong. It was a systematic erasure of his own bloodline. Word spread fast. It always does in mountain towns. Before the newspaper hit the porch steps, and before the television stations finished setting up their cameras, folks already knew something awful had happened. Phones started ringing. Church members called one another. Family members climbed into trucks and headed toward the hospital. Nobody wanted to believe the rumors. Unfortunately, the rumors turned out to be true. In the days that followed, Beckley went into a state of shock. The Ball family murders completely shattered the sense of security that Beckley had back then. His uncle Larry Honaker spoke to reporters, his voice cracking with a disbelief. They just gripped the entire family in the whole area. He said, "We can't believe it happened." He said, as word spread across Raleigh County, disbelief traveled faster than facts. Police gathered in diners, churches, grocery stores, and barbershops trying to make sense of what they had heard. Details changed a little bit depending on who was telling the story, but the reaction stayed the same. Nobody could believe it. Sunday services that week felt different. Some church pews were filled with people looking for comfort. Others, filled with people looking for answers. Unfortunately, answers were in short supply. Ministers stood up there in front of the congregation trying to explain something that, just didn't make no sense. How could a family that seemed normal end in a horror story that would make Stephen King flinch? How could a young man active in church commit an act that left 4 members of his own family dead? Even today, more than 40 years later, them questions still linger. Was it simple teenage rage? Or maybe was there an undiagnosed mental illness? Maybe was there some problems inside the house and nobody outside or the family ever saw? Or was it one of them awful cases where no explanation will ever fully satisfy anybody, maybe? The truth was that investigators could reconstruct what happened, identify the weapons, and establish timelines. The court proceedings moved fast. There weren't much doubt about who committed the crime. Jerry Ball was convicted. That understanding, why was a completely different matter. Sometimes the why dies with the person that committed the crime. And in this case, whatever Jerry Ball carried, it eventually followed him to his grave. Maybe that's part of what keeps the story alive in these old mountains. Human beings are wired to look for causes. We want storms to have warnings and disasters to leave clues. We want evil to wear a sign around its neck announcing itself from a mile away. But cases like this remind us that life don't always work that way. Sometimes warning signs are missed. Sometimes there ain't no warning signs at all to miss. And sometimes the people we think we know best, remained mysterious right up till the very end. That's a hard lesson, but I guarantee you, one of the people in Beckley never forgot, because long after newspaper headlines faded and court proceedings ended, 4 empty places remained around the family table. Harold never grew old. Betty never got to watch grandchildren play in her yard. Stephen never become a teenager. Richard never got the chance to discover who he might have become either. The mountains moved on. The mountains always do. Seasons changed. Children grew up. New families moved into the old neighborhoods. But every now and again, somebody still remembers the Ball family. And when they do, the same questions drift back through the hills like fog rolling through a ridge in a cold winter morning. Why? Jerry Ball was initially held in juvenile detention, but the sheer gravity of the crime meant that the state wasn't about to let him go. He was eventually transferred to the adult system. He was handed 4 concurrent life sentences, one for every life he took under that roof. He would never see the light of day outside of prison again. Records show that he died in prison, where I reckon they just chunked him in that old Rich Mountain Neck dirt, went back in and washed the Jerry Ball off their hands. I say I reckon because there's not anything I can find that says anything about what they did with him after he died, and there's no date available for when it happened. But then I reckon again, weren't nobody left to tell, so they could come and claim him anyway. Today in 2026, if you drive north of Beckley, you won't find the Ball house. It's gone, reclaimed by the mountains, or maybe torn down to make room for new memories. The story has become a dark legend among the old timers. They talk about it in a way people talk about sudden rock slide or flash flood, a natural disaster that made no sense and left only ruins in its wake. They talk about the good boy who turned into a phantom in the span of a few hours. But for the people of Beckley, tragedy ain't about the young man. It's about the 2 little boys who never got to grow up in the shadow of the mountain. About Harold and Betty, who thought they were raising a family in a safe Christian home, never knowing that the oldest was the greatest danger, and it was sitting right at their own dinner table. You go up on that mountain and listen to the wind whistle through them hemlocks. Take a minute, look at the faces of the ones you love. These mountains are beautiful, but they're steep, and the shadows they cast can be longer. Until the next time, make sure you settle them differences before you sit down for supper. That'll make life taste a good bit better and go down a heap smoother. Hope you got something out of our story today. If you did, please rate and review the podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, Spotify, or Rumble, throw us a like, and don't forget to subscribe or follow wherever you watch or listen. Come on over to Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend podcast group on Facebook, where we talk Appalachian or about anything else you want to talk about. I'll be back real soon with another Appalachian murder, mystery, or legend, and I will see you then.